Welcome, everyone. I'm Kat Lloyd, Vice President of Programs here at the Tenement Museum. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's Tenement Talk on Koshersoul, the latest book from Michael W. Twitty. Tonight, we're connecting to you live from the Levine's kitchen here in our tenement on Orchard Street. In this tenement, we've recreated the home of Harris and Jenny Levine in 1897. This kitchen would have been Jenny Levine's main space in the home. And although she might not have ever thought about this or discussed it with her family, in his mind, what made this a Jewish kitchen or a Jewish home? How what she cooked was connected to generations past, and how she was making new traditions by cooking here in New York City rather than thousands of miles away in her birthplace in Europe. What makes a Jewish kitchen? What makes a Black Jewish kitchen? How does what we cook in our homes reflect who we are, where we've come from through generations? Michael Twitty explores these questions and more in Koshersoul as he looks at recipes, personal stories that take us to places across the world, and look at how the Black and Jewish diasporas are intertwined, and how the kitchen becomes a place to understand culture and identity. It's my honor to introduce Michael W. Twitty, culinary historian and acclaimed author not only of Koshersoul, but of The Cooking Gene, which won 2 James Beard Awards. He'll be in conversation tonight with Dr. Christina Greer, author of Black Ethnics, Race, Immigration, and the Pursuit of the American Dream, and also a museum trustee. We welcome you into the conversation tonight. Please share your questions and comments in the chat, and we'll make sure they get connected to Dr. Greer and Michael Twitty. We're glad to be offering tonight's program free of charge. By making a donation of any size in the link below, you help us continue to rebuild and continue offering programs like this. If you're looking for more ways to stay connected to the museum, visit our website at tenement.org for information on membership, other virtual programs, and visiting us on site here on Orchard Street. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you'll get notifications of our upcoming programs. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you enjoy tonight's conversation.
Okay, hi and welcome everyone. I am Professor Christina Greer and I am here with Michael Twitty.
Hi, how are you?
I'm so excited. I'm a trustee here at the Tenement Museum and I want to thank everyone for tuning in. This evening we are going to be talking about Koshersoul. I'm so excited. You know, and we honored you at our gala last year, and the executive director of the Tenement Museum, Annie Polland, and I were talking. We wanted to go deeper into not just this amazing book, but your journey into Judaism, and especially in this particular moment in time where it seems as though, especially in this country, anti-Semitism has always been on the rise, but right now it seems particularly insidious.
It's morphing.
Yeah, and so many of these issues are colliding. So I love this book. I love your intersectional approach to thinking about not just food, but culture and identity. So I want to dive back in. Your first book, The Cooking Gene, you said, I want to properly quote you, you said it was essentially a birthday present. Mm-hmm. And then Koshersoul is recovery food. Mm-hmm. And so I want you to link those 2 books for our audience members in case they haven't read The Cooking Gene and they haven't picked up the Koshersoul just yet.
So the first thing is that The Cooking Gene, Koshersoul, and the next book in the trilogy, which is going to be about the queer presence in the American kitchen, are all.
I knew it was going to be 3 books.
Yes.
I was like, wait, what are you going to tell us what the third
right?
one is going to be? Okay.
So it's all about the intersections and identities that don't often get discussed in terms of food identity, contextually in American life. So The Cooking Gene is more about all the books touch on some aspect of the other identities. But The Cooking Gene is more about my African-American culture and roots and Southern culture and roots from Africa to America, from slavery to freedom, using my genealogy and genetic genealogy to tell those stories. Koshersoul is about my spiritual but also culinary and cultural journey as an American Jew, but also the way that Jews of African descent in North America. I'm being very specific. It's not Ethiopian Jews, it's not just any Jews of color anywhere around the world. Very specifically, Jews of color of African American, Afro-Caribbean, and Afro-Latin descent living in pretty much U.S. and Canada. Okay. And then The Queer Presence in the American Kitchen. I haven't really named that book yet, but it's because I was told you don't exist. But I said, wait a minute, if no one gives me a chance, if people gatekeep stories like mine and keep them from the mainstream, then I'm never going to exist. So I decided to push forward, not for my sake, but for the sake of other people who don't hear their stories told, who feel they're very niche, who feel they're very locked out. So the cooking gene was essentially, I don't know what in my gut told me, 2019 is not going to be a year of serious reflection on a national stage about the presence and the import of African America. So let me just get this out of the way right now. Hey, Black America, hey, African America, my people, my country, here is my gift to you. And I got that because one of my great role models, Alex Haley, said that Roots was his present to America on her 200th birthday. How powerful was that? So for me, the cooking gene was that gift. This is a recovery food because, of course, during the time I was writing this, we had tumultuous politics, but we also had, a pandemic, which stopped me from doing what I wanted to do, which was go from house to house, traveling around the country. I was supposed to go to Toronto, LA, this place, that place, with a camera and a camera crew and cook in people's kitchens and interact with them. And it didn't happen because it couldn't. Right. So the conversations that you see are either right before the pandemic or during the pandemic on Zoom.
Right.
And so I had to transcribe all that myself and really make sure the words were right. So it's the chicken soup to, the birthday gift. Or the matzo ball soup. Or the matzo ball gumbo. If you're feeling, you feel like you need something to make you feel a little bit better and heal yourself.
So we're going to get to some of those recipes before we, and I want to talk about some of those interviews. But you said a phrase that I want you to unpack for us, food identity.
Yes.
How do you define that?
Food identity takes a lot of different, forms. Someone's food identity could not be attached to where they grew up, their culture, or their neighborhood. It could be what they find their own place. So, for example, people who go to Hawaii, who live there for a long time, who become, in a sense, part respectful and part of the culture. Well, even if they left Hawaii, their food identity is going to be a mixture. It's going to be Pacific Rim. It's going to be Native Hawaiian. It's going to be the culture of Portuguese and Puerto Ricans and Asian folks who came to the islands as well. That could be your food identity. It could also be being from Black folks from Florida, right? It could be with grouper and grits. It could be all of those things.
Fried grouper.
But fried grouper, right? And so it's just this narrative of how not only people create food, but how food creates people that doesn't necessarily get spelled out in a cookbook. And for some of us, recipes are nice. Recipes are great. But they often end up in the ash heap of discarded ephemera versus the way that just talking about the way food makes us feel, the memories that it engenders. When we had a conversation about this, what you told me basically was it wasn't just the dish or the food, it was the self-respect. It was the ownership of your grandparents' reality. They were hardworking people who used everything they had to make a life out of nothing. And that's that kind of realization. What is the mega story behind those bites that excites me? But also just stories. I mean, the people who I talk about, write about, research, they're all part of my, makeup. My makeup is African American. My makeup is Black. Why I said two different terms. My makeup is Jewish. My makeup is queer. My makeup is Southern. Survivor people. Right. But often people who, when we're annihilated, we're forgotten. Which is why the memory and the stories are so important.
And I love how you're constantly connecting memory and food together because that is such a long-standing African American tradition.
Yes.
It's a long-standing Jewish tradition. And you're bridging the two. So for people who have not picked up the book yet, Koshersoul, can you walk us through two journeys? One,
sure.
Your journey to Judaism, and two, your journey as a chef.
Okay.
Because when you and I had a long conversation, for those of you who haven't heard Michael on my podcast, The Blackest Questions, we're in New York also, so I don't know if our streaming audience can hear all of the sounds and horns in the background. But your knowledge of the African American culinary history was something that blew me out of the water. I mean, obviously, you're smart, you write books, we get it, lots of people do that, but there are a lot of folks who cook food who don't know the history of food.
Right.
And the feedback that I got from our conversation was like, how does this man know who the first cookbook author was, or has such a long-standing history of all the African-American men and women who were in kitchens, known and unknown, sort of creating this foundation of sort of our culinary
That's what you get from going into those spaces. I will never forget one of the most profound moments I ever had was being at Monticello with Dr. Lenny Sorensen, and
who's that for?
who is the former research historian.
Okay.
African American woman who was the original one to tell these stories about James Hemings and Edith Fawcett and Fannie Hurd and these other people who were Ursula, who were the creators of Jefferson's Kitchen. Jefferson didn't do none of that cooking. They did. And
just like Colonel Sanders did.
Right, didn't fry that chicken. But I mean, the fact that there was this unique community, and I remember I was in the clothes. That's what I do. Part of the rest of my life is living history, and I was in this white chef's coat, and what creeped me out was I had gone to the restroom to kind of like freshen up and make sure I was right. I didn't realize that at that time, that restroom was actually above the space of the original kitchen that James cooked in. And I took a picture, and it's kind of a weird picture, but it's me like looking, selfing in the mirror. But I'm not going to kid you. I felt that hand and that face behind me. Like, all right, cool. And but below me, right from where I was the original kitchen that James was cooking in before, during, and after France. And so to me, I walked out. She says, that's where the kitchen was. And having her as somebody who is my friend and my elder, my teacher, and we went to the newer kitchen that everybody sees when they go to Monticello, explained to me this history. Like, I got it. But it's not just the Monticellos. It's the small places. It's the urban spaces that enslavement happened in. And a lot of this comes from my engagement with Jewish learning. I was a Hebrew school teacher. And as a Hebrew school teacher, I was teaching 7th graders, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and getting about a bunch of gray and white hairs. And I taught about the Shoah, about the Holocaust. And so I'm actually going through with them. I felt like the Shoah was often told in just trauma notes, as opposed to a whole way of life ended. And I felt like my students weren't getting that whole way of life. They just understood that on a very basic level, there were Jews living in Europe. They didn't understand that there was a whole history behind that. So one day when the parents brought in a tape, the tape was an interview she did the year I was born, 77, interviewing a survivor. And the survivor's interview begins with, I didn't know there was a war until I was out picking mushrooms and I heard the first shots. So I was like, clicked in my head. No one just picks mushrooms in the wild. You have to know your environment and the world around you intimately. And I told my students, I said, when you heard that part, what did you notice? They're like, oh no. And I'm like, that shtetl that she lived in was at least 800 years old. So people had been living in that community for that settlement for almost a millennium, and therefore they weren't guests. They were part of the culture and the community and the country. And so I thought to myself, coming off of those lessons, what if I told the story of African Americans in that same way, calling back to those moments? What would our ancestors what would they have said if they could have written down, not on pain of death, their stories, their lives? So for me, those two things have always been kind of intertwined. I've used the spirit of moral suasion in my work in Jewish foodways. I've used the spirit of reclamation and return. And then in African American foodways, I have used a language that's elevated. It's not scraps. This is memory work. This is text expressed as material objects, in this case food, in the process of cooking. So there's that. I guess I did the questions in reverse, right? When I was 7 years old, I told my mother I was Jewish. And my mother was like,
Okay, wait. Set the stage for me.
I literally
Where
was.
are you?
I was
Where is
literally
she? What's
in
she doing? What's she
our
wearing?
community in Maryland. In
This little bright-eyed Michael
Yes.
walks up to mommy and says,
I'm Jewish. My mother said to
"Is
me,
she in the kitchen? Where is she?"
I'm in the kitchen. And I said, I'm Jewish. My mother, a blessed memory, who was like, the General Patton of mothers. She was always 10 steps ahead of me. Smartest human being I'll ever know in this life. My mother said to me, okay. So my mother knew what Jewish was. She grew up in Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. Cincinnati was Appalachian white, German Jewish, and migrant black folks. That's who lived there. So for her, this was not, she knew the basics. She's like, okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So for a week, she let me be Jewish.
And what's your favorite? Are they Baptist, Southern Baptist?
Nominally Christian.
Okay.
I mean, my mom grew up Lutheran.
Okay.
And the reason why was because, simple explanation. In those days, during the Great Migration, you either migrated with your church, that was a thing, or your sister church to your church at home. But then sometimes for some people, that meant being in communities and places where those old hierarchies and status things were. So a lot of black people picked up and went, okay, I don't want that anymore, but I still want to go to church. What do I do? They became Lutheran, Pentecostal, or Catholic. And other black folks became Muslim or Jewish. And that's a really important part of the story. It was a way of both keeping tradition and breaking tradition. So that was my mom's reality. It wasn't just a simple narrative of we were Baptist or we were AME or CME. That definitely had been a part of my parents' religious world. But the choices that it was a black Lutheran church, which meant that it wasn't quite the same as what my grandmother grew up with.
Right.
Where church was actually a form of entertainment for little kids as well as,
I mean, listen, you get dressed up, you get the candy.
Right.
You get, little...
And they would church hop.
Oh.
Because, Sunday was a long day.
I'm tired just thinking about it.
Right? And they would, there was food, they had friends,
so much food.
And there were different churches.
Talking.
And so much
so
talking.
Much gossip.
And so much gossip and so much the clothes, the hats, the crowns, the whole production. And it's also important for people to remember that in my grandparents' time, in Birmingham, in Louisville, and Atlanta, who were the people who were essentially the cogs and wheels of Jewish life in those southern cities? Black kids. Black kids were the kids who turned on the lights and put out the candles and made sure that all those things were done. Black women created the fusion cooking of black Southern food and Ashkenazi Jewish food in those communities. And as Mrs. Covert, of blessed memory, put it to me, she says, we learned how to be Americans from the black folks on Dryad Street. She was from New Orleansian. So all of that is the precursor. Now go back to the kitchen table.
7 years old.
7 years
Mommy,
old.
I'm Jewish. I thought you were going to say the Different Strokes episode when Arnold had a Jewish friend and he decided to be Jewish for a week.
Well, there was no, I didn't even know what a bar and bat mitzvah was.
Okay.
I just thought, okay. But also I grew up in a community where, in that part of Montgomery County, Maryland, outside of D.C., we were between the conservative reform and what would become one of the larger Orthodox suburban communities called Kent Mill. And in Kent Mill, Kent Mill, you initially had a lot of people who survived the Shoah. And then it was more and more people who wanted to live the Baal Shiva life.
What's that?
You know Baal Shiva? The closest thing I can say is Baal Shiva is like a born-again Jew who decides to live a very observant Orthodox life.
Okay.
And so that community was, the Jewish hippies who wanted to be religious, but not the religious of their parents. They really wanted to go there, but go there in a new way. So the people who I grew up around, I mean, when I tell people, oh yeah, every fall I used to help build a sukkah. Not the sukkah. My whole community was sukkah, 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 sukkah. But it was also, Salvadorian, Korean, Black, Puerto Rican. I realized many years later I did not live in a red line bubble. Because of the federal government, because of the Army, the federal government, but also just like the fact that DC attracted different people from different places. I was able to grow up in a world where, you had to know different languages to go to somebody's house, where you ate different foods, where you learned different histories of different people. I didn't have to like pop a balloon to walk into another universe. So for me, I'm 7 years old.
Right.
I'm like, okay, why are you Jewish? I didn't know. And so my mother let me be Jewish for a week, and then she sat me down at the end of the first week. She said, very plain. My mom would talk to me like I was a grown man. She said, I'm very proud of you. You seem very committed to your new faith and everything. So just one thing we need to figure out. I'm sitting there really smug because the dream of every son is to best his mother. And next thing I know, my mother says, we have to go to the hospital. Now, this woman knows I don't even get my finger pricked. So she's just like, I'm like, for what? She says, you know the thing they did to you when you were a baby? I said, yes, ma'am. Well, they got to do it all over again because you need a breast. Honey, child.
That was fun.
That was fun. That was it. That was good enough for me. But it didn't stop the fact that I was definitely, in a community where Jewish holidays, Jewishness, Jewish culture was not a secret. Those are my neighbors. And yes, fewer people went to the public school in my part of the neck of the woods than went to Jewish day school. But it didn't matter because those kids were being in my neighborhood anyway. So it was something really special. And then many years later, I find out droplets that I find out, oh yeah, you have Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry. Okay, wow. Many years later, I find out when I did my cooking gene DNA stuff, oh yeah, you got tons of cousins from Ukraine, and they have all 4 Jewish grandparents. And there's a part of you that goes, huh? And there's another part of me after doing all this historical research and genealogy and all this other stuff that goes, but yeah, this is the part of American history and cultural identity that we don't talk about. And everybody has a Cherokee grandma. And her hair is so long and so straight she can sit on it.
Right.
That's how we reckon it, right?
Right.
But it's more complicated than that.
The Cherokees are like,
since when everywhere.
Everybody's Cherokee now.
Right? Everybody's Cherokee now, right? And so we have those kind of narratives. It's like, huh? But then the other narratives we kind of obscure. And we really obscure is the relationship between, I'm not going to use color terms or phenotype terms. The relationship between European and African individuals and communities and indigenous communities in the context of the New World. Okay. The fact that we had early Asian American communities, Filipinos in Louisiana 250 years ago. And these genes and families persist. But the fact that, the Jewish community was scattered, it was very complicated through the colonial period. Some people had enslaved people. Some people were violently against slavery. Some people had no opinion whatsoever. Some people were peddlers. What did peddlers do? Peddlers weren't just like, hey, I'll find a wife someday. The founder of Montgomery, Alabama, essentially, the first settler of it, was a Jewish man who married a Creek woman. So when we bury these histories, these legacies, the fact that the Register of Free Negroes in Charleston, South Carolina, was full of Levies and Cohens and Sequeiras and Rodriguez's, and those names were Jewish names in that community.
But that's what we've always done as a nation. This is what Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about, those who believe they are white. Right. We know about black people who are passing, so either they pass as Italian or they pass as Jewish or they pass as, just run-of-the-mill white folks to do whatever either they left their community full stop or they funneled money back. well-documented books about passing.
Or like The Color of Water, which didn't happen once. You know, was this, you know, these kind of narratives and these kind of stories are what make, I think, Kosher Soul sing a little bit, because I'm just saying that we have an alternative, not alternative facts, but we have keys to an alternative history.
So here's where I want to bring it back to the book, because at several points throughout the book, you essentially make this declaration. It's like, I'm here. We are here. And so who is that to? Who are you saying that to in the book?
Everybody. Everybody, especially Americans. Mm-hmm. I think people really do believe that we have gone, we, that pronoun. Some of us have gone to a mental and spiritual space where we really do believe in a sort of corporate unity, but false separation. I never could vibe with those people who talked the gospel of the races should be separate. Mm-hmm. That's what God commands.
Right.
So how come y'all been mixing since the beginning of humanity? How come you've been changing, evolving, migrating? Mm-hmm. And if it was not to be, then like a hawk and a dove, you wouldn't be able to make a new bird.
Right.
But you've been making new birds for quite some time. And those birds live in us.
The fact that Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson's wife are sisters should tell us a lot.
When I tell people that, when I give that little time, they go, you know, they were related, right? Like, huh? I said, yes. When I say this is about family connections, I wasn't lying. No. And it wasn't the only one. And that's what people have to realize. Right. So when we talk about this particular niche, I think some people are sort of between the extremes of blacks and Jews, long-term sense of cooperation in the civil rights movement, but also, you know, flashpoints of negativity. Mm-hmm. And then the other version is antipodal, on two sides of the globe, nothing in common, the furthest thing from each other. Mm-hmm. That's the joke. And it's a joke I take particular umbrage with when I realize how much in common these two diaspora groups have. And the fact that we've often shared some of the same places of marginalization and othering, because we're the two original sins of the West. Mm-hmm. Other than, of course, the global sins of misogyny, classism, and, you know, other kinds of isms and phobias. But essentially, anti-Semitism first, and then later on anti-blackness, become the blueprint for how the West addresses Native Americans, how it addresses people of the Indian subcontinent, how it addresses people in the Pacific Islands and Australia, and how it approaches China and other countries where it wants to make this incursion. Mm-hmm. These sins start with the Greco-Roman approach to the Jews. These sins start with this gradual souring of the European perspective towards Africans, from us being this noble spiritual people to being worthy of being inhuman enslaved people.
Mm-hmm. Which is interesting, because I teach my students, I don't use the word slave. I was like, slave is a noun.
Nope.
Book, pen, slave. You know, it takes away the fact that these were people who had lives, families, relationships, friendships.
Humanity.
Human beings. And so I use the term enslaved human beings or enslaved Africans to make it such that it's like their circumstance is slavery. But that is not who they are as an identity. And so when you talked about this with, you know, the Holocaust, it's like, we have individuals and communities. These are people who were in community together who then ended up in a circumstance. But it also makes it a dual relationship. Because I feel like, is this the great anti-black, anti-Jewish agenda? Right. The horns are just making sure that we can't talk. We're still talking. So, but I think it's one of these situations where we have to, I mean, this is very, it's fabulous. I think it's really important to always remind people that it's a dual relationship.
Oh, yes. You cannot put that energy and the effort and that stuff out there without coming back to you. Mm-hmm. And that's
James Baldwin talked about that.
Yeah, that's a scary thing. It's like people don't realize this ain't just about what happens to me. Mm-hmm. It's what happens to you long term. It's about your karma, about your issues, about what you're trying to run from. I mean, I look at people who are anti-Semitic, who are anti-black, and those things, with each other.
And we're in a moment right now where
we're seeing that, and we're seeing that in a multicolor, coalition.
You don't need to have men to have patriarchy. You don't need to have white people to have
white supremacy.
white supremacy at all. You know,
Not
I
at
mean,
all.
and we're seeing that, you know, there are lots of people who are going to uphold this anti-black, anti-Semitic series of
You know what?
policies
The
and
way I put it,
positions.
Christina, is like this. When we fantasize about saving the world in our popular media, it's always a black and a Jew that save the world.
Walk me through that.
You know, we
Like
have
the whole like black women are magic.
we have magical Negroes,
I'm exhausted.
magical black women, strong black women,
Right. Oh, of
right?
course.
We have
Well, the Stacey Abrams trope of like, you know, she will literally on her back carry the entire United States across the finish line.
or that we'll have every Jew is what was the fellow who was a Salkin that resolved polio? Jonas Salk. So every Jew is a Jonas Salk. Every Jew is an Albert Einstein. So you put a Stacey Abrams with a I feel like I'm remaking the Beyonce song Formation. You put a Stacey Abrams with a Jonas Salk, you get a Michael Twitty, like whatever, what's going on? You put some Kugel with some kosher varnish because you get a nice Shabbos meal. I don't know.
Right.
But I mean, I guess
My mama's Stacey Abrams, my daddy's. Okay, no.
Right.
I won't
Or that other version about the fake one. You get you take some white bread and some mayonnaise, get a Trump supporter. Anyways, we didn't say that. We kid people. We're not being political, but we are being real about the idea that that these two things, look at the movies. You have Will, keep my wife's name out your mouth, and Jeff Goldblum. Mm-hmm. You have all these comedies where Richard Pryor, blessed memory, and Gene Wilder, blessed memory, take on these outrageous, things. Hell, you have RuPaul and Michelle Visage solving fabulous issues every week on RuPaul. I mean, we have this constant thing about these very people who the West has always sought to annihilate.
Right.
Because if they cooperate and work together, white supremacy gets weakened. In a sense that the nasty people are right. They've always told the truth. It's like when Hitler's like, the Jew has a special soul. In Judaism we call that Pentelayid. Yeah, if you wipe us out, there's going to be no more of the spirit and the tradition and the culture, but not just that, but this drive towards repairing the world and making the world a better place. That is the best of who we are. And we acknowledge we have a bad side, but we also acknowledge that improving is the nature of the Jewish people, religious or not. But our enemies also say, if we don't tamper them and push them back, they're going to mess us up. You're right. Mm-hmm. We are, because we are the never again people. We are never going back on boats. We are never going back in gas chambers. We are not going to be in a place where U.S. politicians say things like, well, guess what, Christian country, Jews, get ready for your second, third place citizenship and be grateful for it. No. Not to the extent that Jews have built America and black folks have built America and indigenous people have built America and women have built America and queer people built America the way they've never built a country in the history of the world before.
And some of us did it for free.
And some of us did it without a check or retirement for almost four centuries. And that's the thing that we have to sort of like move from, that kind of the trauma of that to the celebration of the everyday life of people who live in this nexus. That's why I talk about food a lot. Food is also not just the memories, not just the culture, it's not just the individual profiles. It is the joy. Mm-hmm. It is the, guess what? I made it. Let's have dinner.
Well, and I was thinking about that when we were just laughing because so much of cooking is that community and that laughter and literally the touching, right?
Right.
It's not just the touching of the ingredients and things that came from the soil. It's the touching of one another.
That's right.
Passing of the dough, the butter, whatever it may be. We're kneading things together.
Right.
And it's this long, tactile series of memories that really does come through in this book. And I love the fact that she put some recipes for us in the back. Just because after you finish reading it, you are inspired to actually, not just go to the kitchen yourself, but also I wanted to, think about some of these recipes because a lot of us are going to be with our families for the holidays, the various holidays. thinking about what can I make with my young niece versus what can I make with my slightly older niece. What do I need to make by myself because I need to focus, right? What can I make with my mother? I mean, there are a lot of multifaceted recipes in here that blend both I would say not just your African American identity, but your African roots.
Yes.
And also your Jewish roots. So tell us a little bit more about how you chose some of the recipes. And I'm just going to shout out a few because here are the ones that I want to make. Because I love okra. So my grandmother used to grow okra in her backyard in Yulee, a tiny little town called Yulee. Actually founded by the first Jewish senator in Florida. That's his last name was Yulee. I found that out at the American Jewish Historical Society. So you have an okra soup recipe, and I love okra. Steamed okra, fried okra, it doesn't matter. I always eat okra and tomatoes when I miss my bestie who lives in D.C. I wake up on a Sunday and make okra and tomatoes, and then it's like, oh, I miss Naomi Carter. Here we are. This black-eyed pea fritter. I always make black-eyed peas, obviously, on New Year's Day, because African Americans have to make black-eyed peas on New Year's Day to start the year off, but I've never made a fritter. Senegalese chicken soup.
Yeah.
And then jollof rice. Listen, I'm a rice connoisseur.
Right.
Any Nigerian knows I will eat you at a house and home. I will have no manners. I will walk in, say hello to your family, eat a bowl of jollof rice, and then say, excuse me, one more.
Yeah.
Excuse me, third. Like, they're just like, where's it going? It's like, doesn't matter. I just need jollof all day. And then a nice little rice and peas, which I think, I'm tapping more and more into my Bahamian roots. So I was like, I should probably, besides, I've got a good pigeon pea and rice recipe, but I need a solid black-eyed pea recipe. So tell us, what are some of your favorite recipes in the book? And what do you think, for someone who's like, I'm scared, like, I don't know, all these recipes are new, what would you tell them to start with?
They're all sort of like,
and they're so
I wouldn't say
clearly
foolproof, but
yeah, I mean, they're clear. This isn't like the New York Times where it's like, take a little cephalon. I'm like, what is that? Like, and it's like, take 6 grams of this. I was like, who's measuring in grams, New York Times? Like, this is very, very sort of straightforward where it's like, hey, you're using
there's a word in Yiddish, edel.
Okay.
They're not edel recipes. They are recipes that come from, so the okra soup and the fritter are actually from a community cookbook of a synagogue, a sisterhood in Koshersoul.
Oh.
So to remind people that Jews in the Caribbean, Brazil, Latin America were a thing for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And that essentially you could not be in these communities without black folks and Jews rubbing elbows in many different ways. Mm-hmm. So now these dishes are considered by those communities Jewish food. Even though there is, black-eyed peas and corn, tutu, which is Yoruba.
Okay.
And there's okra soup, and there's fufu, and there's black-eyed pea fritters and fried plantain, and okra soup, and all that stuff is part of their story. But also, if you went to Brazil and Cuba and other places, rice and beans is considered part of the Jewish Cuban repertoire. The other level is recipes that were created when Ashkenazi Jewish recipes were fused with African American ones in the Deep South. Another one is what happens when Jews from West Indian and African immigrant backgrounds. One of my favorite parts of the interviews was when I interviewed my friend Naftali, who is from the same area I lived in. And he talks about being Ghanaian and living in Kent Mill with his children and his wife, who is Ashkenazi. They're both Orthodox. But how he makes shitor, the traditional Ghanaian hot sauce, kosher, because it usually contains a lot of shrimp and crayfish and other things. And even magi, he can't have magi with the seasoning bouillon. So what do you do? How do you make that all work? He's like, I use miso, and I use kosher consomme, and I use seaweed and other things, and I make it taste like shitor, like the real shitor. And then he says, my challah is more like the Ghanaian sugar bread, kind of made in buns so people can tear it apart. But he's like, I give my children fufu. I give my children chichinga, which is suya, the West African kebab and barbecue. Fused with brisket and this and that. So they won't forget the fact they're Ghanaian and they're Jewish. And so I thought that was really impressive. But so is the fact that, Rivka, my friend from Toronto, is Jamaican and Jewish. She's like, in her recipe, I made sure to include the words, you could use canned, but why? And so a good friend of mine was helping me edit. She's like, well, I don't know. That doesn't sound very nice. And I said, but my dear, it's Jamaican.
Right. Listen.
There's a way to do it.
You should have just put in.
Right? that sound, right? That sound, that sucking the teeth sound. But it's just to show people, there's millet and there's couscous salad. There's so many different ways to approach it. Mm-hmm. There are some Sephardi Mizrahi-based recipes. Pink rice, I want to introduce people to pink rice which is a kind of a cousin to red rice.
Okay.
And then we have, what's the other dish? The Sephardic black-eyed peas.
Yes.
And other things.
I saw that one too.
The fact that Sephardic Rosh Hashanah is greens and black-eyed peas.
Yes.
And many other good luck foods, in the same way that African-American New Year's is some of the same thing. And it's sort of like parallel traditions.
Well, you said this is the black-eyed peas with tomatoes Sephardic style is adapted from Marcy Cohen Ferris's matzo ball gumbo.
Yes.
Which I need to know more about that.
So Marcy Cohen Ferris, I gave a whole chapter to her because she, I met her through Joe Nathan, the great Jewish American chef and cookbook author. And Marcy is from Blytheville, Arkansas.
Okay.
Her husband, Bill Ferris, the National Endowment for Humanities many years. But Marcy trained with, what's the fellow's name? John Michael Vlatch at George Washington University in folklore.
Okay.
So she wrote a dissertation based on her grandmother's recipe file, but also based on her wanting to document the food traditions of the Jewish South. And it wasn't just people who lived in the big cities. It was people living in the Mississippi Delta and the countryside right outside of New Orleans and the coast of the Carolinas and Georgia. And what's through and through her work is this notion that you cannot talk about this without talking about black people. It's impossible. But also that there were many Jews there and they made a Jewish life that was very different, but it was still a Jewish life and very rich. And if she had not interviewed those folks and recorded their recipes, quite frankly, we wouldn't even know they were there because the community started to move. Once, I guess, part of, when certain cultural and political cycles came about in the Deep South, it went from being a place of absolute promise to being a place where there was a whole new meaning to what church do you belong to. And someone casually said that in conversation. So the one thing people don't understand is before, let's say the 1970s, 80s, Jews were allowed to live in these communities on the condition they didn't shake the waves too much. It really wasn't that deep. But then after that, time period, it was almost as if Leo Frank had been dug up. And we were back to those days of violent intimidation. So for lack of opportunity, jobs for needing a different culture, people left.
Right.
They went to New York. They went to L.A.
They went to places where they could have community.
Right.
A larger community.
A larger community.
Yeah.
Communities were dying. They were dwindling. They went from being large and cohesive to being smaller. And people ran away. And then there's, of course, Atlanta still has a large, Jewish, so does New Orleans. But again, with Katrina, communities ebbed and flowed. It's just something very powerful about it. Natchez, Mississippi had a thriving Jewish community. Memphis still has one to some extent.
Right.
But the question is, who's going to move there? Who's going to reinvigorate those communities? So for me, putting those recipes in there and also honoring her research and her work is very important to me. Because Mrs. Covert, who I talked about earlier, who's no longer with us, my dream was to have her and Leah Chase sit down with me for a meal.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question. So one, I'd be remiss if I didn't sort of mention at the museum, at the Tenement Museum, we have an exhibit called Under One Roof, where there's a post-Holocaust Jewish family, a Puerto Rican family, and a Chinese American family. And the beauty of the tour is that right before you walk in, the apartment where we'll meet these different families, there's a mezuzah on the door, which is a signal to a Jewish family that lived here, But we know that this family no longer has to essentially live in the shadows the way a lot of families have had to do in this country.
Right.
In modern day. So, that being that, I need to make sure I shout out for our viewers who should come to the Tenement Museum if you haven't done so already. So, you interview a lot of wonderful people, great conversations. You feel like you're at the table with your friends. It's an accessible entree, right? That we're having conversations about food and identity and culture. Who do you wish you could have included? You've mentioned some of the folks who were in the book.
Oh my gosh.
Because you wrote this, largely during the pandemic, so there's some constraints there, and then also we've lost some wonderful chefs and great minds to think through these issues. Who would you include if you could? If you had another wish list?
Well, right before High Holidays this year, we lost Rabbi Yisrael Francis.
And he was from where?
He was a black Hasidic rabbi from Crown Heights, whose wife and he were both African descent, both Caribbean heritage, both lifelong New Yorkers, and both born Jewish. People who were born Jewish, people who were born Jewish, people who were born Jewish, people who were born Jewish. And I tried to contact him many years ago, and the date was September the 10th, 2001. Like, I knew exactly when it was because I knew exactly what happened the next morning. And it was difficult because, on the one hand, they would address this uniqueness within the Hasidic press and world as if to say, it ain't so bad. We have no problems here. We're good. But with the outside world, not so much. Certainly not to, his wife was actually very encouraging because she really did want me to talk to him. I spoke to Rabbi Chaim Fraser, who was African American, and said something very profound, which was, I'm no longer African American. Well, I guess I'm black. I'm black on paper. I'm Jewish. But he said, I don't mean any insult to anybody. He says, but I am from yeshivish community. No part of him as a black man, albeit a very a black man of mixed heritage, was really included there. So I kind of got it. But Rabbi Francis and his wife and their children kind of stuck out. Right. I mean, browner than me, bigger than me. Like really, his sons become rabbis too. Right. But I really wanted to interview him because after all that time of just like, his son said to me something that was kind of not nice, but it was kind of like, you people like yourself and the questions you're asking are a dime a dozen to my father. And now he's gone. I'm just like, but you know what? There's one book with your daddy's name in it.
Talk about
because I knew the importance of this man telling a story to another black person. Another black person happened to be Jewish. Another black person happened to be Jewish who really wanted to understand how do we move this forward. It's not enough to just live in the Lubavitch bubble.
Right. Because you've been very vocal on Twitter also to talk about the times that you've felt that you weren't included. During the high holidays. Yes. It's like when you're shopping, when you're giving greetings to your fellow brothers and sisters, and it's like not returned.
No, it's like it's very mild. But also the fact that we both know how difficult it is to get black folks to talk about anything sometimes. And that's what also got me. It was that too. It's not just a weird sort of like ambiguous identity moment. It's also a very black moment in the sense of, I really need you to tell me where we're coming from, where we are, and where we're going.
Oh well.
And then a lot of baby, we'll talk another time.
Yeah.
And we never talk. And in his case, it was, I'm tired of that. But he didn't know me. He didn't meet me.
Right.
And I wanted that voice. But I also wanted Rabbi Sandra Lawson, who is very much with us. She is openly gay, Reconstructionist, black woman rabbi. The first. And she's in North Carolina at the moment. Okay. But she's an amazing person. And she's a vegan.
Oh.
And I wish I had really gone into, like, why is she vegan? Right. What does that mean to her in a kosher context, a Jewish context? But it was she was going to marry me and my husband. but the pandemic.
This pandemic,
right? So, I mean, that's another thing that I wanted to do was really have a bigger conversation with her. I did get Yavila McCoy's interview in. She's an African American Orthodox Jewish leader, and her Al-Chet, her confession of sins for Yom Kippur regarding America's racial sins and racial issues. So excellent. I said I have to include this in the book. We have to have that voice. So I mean, it's like anything else we do. You this project comes about, you work it, you have your regrets, you have your things that are missing.
Oh yeah.
God willing, maybe next time, second edition, third, whatever edition I have on, I'll be able to get Rabbi Lawson in there. But overall, for a first effort, I want to make sure that we just need to start the conversation. My grandmother's favorite phrase was, "Don't wait on ceremony." And we can't wait on, given the fact all we've been through and continue to go through, we can't just wait on ceremony to tell stories that are so important. I mean, right now we're living through, as we were talking about earlier, the whole Kanye West controversy. But we don't need him or anybody else to speak for us as Jews of African descent. We can speak for ourselves. But to do that in our world, in our contemporary media world, means people go, "Who are they? Where are they?" Right. And I'm like, here we are.
We're here.
Look past this. Look past me. Look at Hava, and look at Sandra Lawson, and look at Manish Sinha, and look at Shahana, and look at Joe. Look at all these people from Philadelphia, from Wisconsin, from New York, from Atlanta. Look at all these different voices that we have available to us from Toronto and San Francisco, and think about what they have to offer. Because as you well know, it's like this idea that, where could they possibly be? And then I come out with the words, well, technically, there's probably close to 140,000 of us, maybe a little bit more. But there's more than that because we have these other complicated situations. Right. Like, for example, after the Civil Rights Movement, we had a lot more children who were the product of black, non-Jewish, and white Jewish parentage. But a lot of those kids were not made part of the community. Had they been made part of the community, what would the American Jewish community look like? Very serious question. Right. And when I used to go to professional day in my community, I'll never forget one woman, she said to me, I was working with this rabbi who happily helped me convert my son. My son is adopted. My daughter's adopted. My son his parents were, opiate addicts in Appalachia. And she was like, he said, sure. But when she brought home her Asian American adopted daughter and said, can you please, do the same? He said, nope, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I can't do it. And so there's those stories, but there are also stories of people who were trying to make sure that didn't happen.
Right.
We do have B'chol Hashon. We do have other groups that address issues of Jews of color and beyond, and allyship. We do have many organizations that deal with black-Jewish relations. So there's this push-pull between those very searing moments of discord and those extraordinary moments of connection and cooperation and community. And the other part of it is that we're those of us who live this life, inside and outside the community, we're real. Right. Where to get the lulav and esrog from, or as important to us as any other Jewish person. What happens in the Middle East, what happens in Europe, what happens here in America is important to us. And we find ourselves in very, difficult situations. Like in the book, I go out of my way to say, something? I know y'all going to be like, wait a minute, what about Israel-Palestine? I had somebody criticize me and said, why'd you have to bring that up? Because I did. And I have friends who are culinarians from Palestine, and I have friends, culinarians from Israel. And the bottom line is, it tears my heart apart to see certain things. But I'm also unable to talk about them in a normal way because people can be so unreasonable and irascible online.
Yes.
You have to be 2,000% me, or I don't like you. And it's just
you can
like,
say the sky is blue. It's like, you hate trees.
Right.
I'm
you
sorry,
have. Well, I don't hate
the
trees.
Sky is blue. Right.
But I do acknowledge the fact that you can't talk about the food of Israel without talking about, one, the fact that the Palestinian Falahin have their own cuisine, and it's actually regional, multi-regional. And you can't talk about it without talking about the fact that Mizrahi Jews, who were immediately expelled in 1948, and who had also lived in the land since forever, they also had a very common Middle Eastern food culture. That if you look at the Middle East, it's like somebody would say Turkish salad, Palestinian salad, Israeli salad, Greek salad, Egyptian, it's the same salad.
Sir.
But what little bit of whatever they put in it makes it different. But I said in that chapter, I said, well, look, these people have been living and trading and warring and marrying for millennia.
Right. How
do we really pick out those pieces, but also respect the boundaries that people put on their culture, which all of us do?
Right. I want to thank you so much.
Oh,
I mean,
welcome.
I feel like, thank you all for joining us, obviously, but,
yes.
I appreciate you writing this book. I'm excited for book number 3. So for those of you who haven't checked it out yet, there is Cooking Gene, first book.
Yes.
Koshersoul, second book, and then we'll have to wait a while. So you all have some time to read the first 2 books.
And in the middle, there's Rice from UNC Press.
Oh, Rice from UNC Press.
Yes.
So, okay, before I let you out of here, really quickly, tell us what you are excited to cook for in the next month.
Oh my gosh, beignets.
Beignets.
For Hanukkah. So I don't do sifganyot. I find them to be extremely rich and fun, but very difficult for me to cook. So I do beignets.
Okay. So I think we have do we have questions from the audience, or something's going on in the background? I don't know. We'll see. I see a microphone being passed. So I'm going to hand it over to Annie Polland, who is the executive director of the Tenement Museum.
Hi, and I know we have some questions from chat, but really quickly, one of the things I was so interested in was your descriptions of being a Hebrew school teacher.
Yes.
And I need to shout out my own grandmother, Inez Shainfeld of blessed memory, who was a Hebrew school teacher, and I got to sit there and watch her. But I'm wondering, what advice do you have, not just for Hebrew school teachers, but for teachers teaching young people to kind of get past these, divisive times that we're in, and to kind of teach the means of connection that you are teaching, the ways that you can go into your particular culture and use that delving into particular culture to make connections. So what advice for teachers of young people?
One thing I found, in the Hebrew school setting was that there wasn't enough connective tissue. My kids had never seen Fiddler on the Roof. That may seem very simple to most people. Go, but wait a minute. What about Hebrew? What about this? What about that? That's not serious. No. Media representation of who you are can cast a very large shadow.
We know it.
And we know it. That's exactly it.
We know it.
So I brought that energy into that space. But I also I remember bringing in the DVD that has both the movie and the documentary with the history. And the kids were fascinated. 2/3 of the room had never seen it. And then they were fascinated by these are based on real stories and tropes and ideas and the narratives of Shalom Aleichem. And they were like, so what is this thing about the wedding and the people coming through, the soldiers? And I said, that's what a pogrom looked. That's the Hollywood version of what a pogrom looked like. And I told them in reality, there would have been a lot of broken bones, hurt people, burned down houses. And I said, that's why some of you in this room, your great and great grandparents left Russia, left Lithuania. This is the Disney version. And they were just like, it was worse than that. And I said, oh yeah. So I showed them pictures, and they were just like, to watch these 6th graders come alive and just go, and then I was like, okay, so what happens if I just take everything from you, including your phone? And I said, you got to move tomorrow. You got to move tomorrow. And the people you're connected with, you will never see them again. You have to learn a completely new language. You will never, the things you're familiar with that may give you comfort, never. You have to rebuild an entirely new life. And then you have to live in a tenement. What is that about? I said, "You ever used the common toilet before?" They're like, "No." And I'm like, "Uh-huh."
Right.
Try using with 80 of your closest friends.
Right.
You know, just giving them that experience. Next level, showing in these environments a diversity of people. It's so important for people to understand. We come in all different shapes, sizes, colors, etc. Another thing is to let kids be different with each other. If your kids are in a bubble, break them out of the bubble. You know, 2 quick examples. I actually had a day in Hebrew school, one of the different Hebrew schools that I taught at. I taught the older kids, and it was like a night, Sunday night program. I had a day called a night evening called "Bring Your Black Friend Hebrew School Day," and they did. And it was kind of exciting. All of a sudden, I had a room of 50 kids, a third of whom were black. And so they were able to like ask questions, and sometimes I'd be like, "I'm not answering the question. Have you two are 14.
This is what friendship is about."
Yes, tell them why we do this, what we do this. Black kids, tell them what you feel like when you walk in the store and you get followed. Your anxiety about driving. It was deep.
It's right.
But somebody had to demonstrate for them that you can have these conversations, because as I always say, conversation is not surrender. Someone can have these conversations, and then in a multicultural society, a multicultural democracy, you must be able to have these conversations in an adult, civil, and respectful way.
Which, sadly, that discourse.
That kind of blew up, but they learned it. So just having those things, but also, I remember there was at one time when I was working with a philanthropy camp, and one of the other, I guess counselors / docents was like, "Yeah, the Orthodox women make themselves look ugly," and my stomach fell. So we had a couple of girls who were Baal Shiva families, and a couple of girls who were from, not that kind of religious. And the girl was like, "Why are you upset?" The other girl I asked her, can we just take the girls out and like do our own thing for a while? So I had these 4 girls, and it was so special to me because the ones of the girls had the short shorts, and the girls had the long jean shorts. Mm-hmm. And instead of them having they were like, "Oh," so she's like, "I don't want to make ourselves look ugly. We're modest." I said, plenty of women and girls in our community dress very well, dress fashionably. We like to dress well. We like to dress in fun ways, but we're just not about showing ourselves off. And so they asked the other girls, "Why do you dress that way?" And I'm like, "Well, for us, part of our independence, part of us expressing our sense of freedom as young women is we get to dress the way we do, and we want respect for it." Mm-hmm. And to see these two, the light bulbs go off in both of their minds and go, "Oh, so that's what it's like to be Orthodox. That's what it's like to be Reformed. But we're the same people. My job is done here, right?" But I wanted the schools to actually have, I'm like, don't wait till they're like in confirmation class, 16 years old. When they're in bar and bat mitzvah stage, have the kids from, Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionists meet each other and talk with each other. Let them have this dialogue.
Well, because as someone who has the privilege of teaching young people, it's like, because young people can have actually a much more upper level conversation half the time than people who are calcified in their own opinions.
Calcified is the word.
Calcified is the word. So it's like young people can actually have that intellectual flexibility or openness to see something. I mean, the windows to their minds are actually much more nimble. And so this is the time to have these conversations so they can build a foundation of community. And
And despite people's attitudes about it, I see a lot of people who don't want young people to be kind. Mm. And here's the bottom line. The good thing is we're getting more and more close to all American children going, what is the big deal? Mm-hmm. Why do you care so much? What is the problem? That's not important. Mm-hmm. And there's some people that's scary because it means their inability to fear and hate means the bubble's getting burst every day. Mm. So be it. So be it. It's no longer cool to bully about this or that. Great. Mm-hmm. So these are ways to move on and push through those things that in my own experience and practice that I've seen. I don't want, one thing I hate doing, Christina, is I hate going to colleges and saying the words, "I'm really sorry. I'm sorry that we did not leave you with a better world. We were supposed to leave you with a world twice as good as the world that we inherited. And that's not happening this time. So I really need you to not be apathetic. I really need you to embrace the idea that we need to talk with each other, have patience with each other, respect each other's boundaries, but at the same point in time, understand that part of the deal of living in a multicultural democracy is having mutual respect."
Right.
That's all I want. I mean, you asked me, who is this book for? It's so that the people who are living in North America now, going through all these cultural changes, understand that we are at a crossing point. We're at an inflection point where we have to really break down what makes us one, e pluribus unum.
Right. We have to decide if that's
what we're going to do.
What we're going to do. We're at a crossroads. And I think the interesting thing about American democracy is every day we're at a crossroads. It's a series of daily decisions that we have to make as to what direction we're going to go in this
And the cool
country.
part is we're in this space right now where those processes happen organically, whether people want them to happen or not.
Right.
And that is what made a New York,
Right.
and that's what it made in America. It didn't happen because, there's a black heaven and a white heaven. It didn't happen because, I guess that's what they do over there. It was when I was talking with Shays Rashawn and Manesh Shana in the book about the Crown Heights community. And I said, he was like, well, people come from all over. And I said, that ain't it. I said, young Hasidic kids walk the streets of Crown Heights singing ska and reggae-inspired Moshiach songs. The Hasidic men are making kosher jerk chicken on the corner. Come on now.
Come on, talk about it.
These black folks are going to the Rebbe's Ohel, the grave, and they're saying prayers, and they're not Jewish. You cannot tell me that just like everywhere else, like this tenement, like Charleston, like New Orleans, like so many other places, that people aren't in some ways meeting minds. And if they're meeting minds and positive things are coming out of them, then we need to know more about that.
Right. Listen, we have time for one or two questions before we're going to get out of here, but it makes me think of, for my home, I had a mezuzah on the door, and everyone's like, "You Jewish? Who's Jewish here?" It's like, listen, someone explain to me what a mezuzah does, what it does for your home,
right.
And I want it.
All the help I can get.
Listen, blessings on blessings. Okay, we've got a question from the audio, from the chat before we get on out of here.
We do, and I think this is a great question to finish up the evening. And just want to say lots of love, lots of appreciation in the chat to both of you. And the question is, do you have a favorite food or cuisine to eat? And, it's a two-parter, do you have a favorite food to prepare or to make?
Wow. Okay. Well, there's a lot of them. I mean, my general rule for Shabbos is 7 dishes. That does not include the challah or the grape juice, the wine. 7 dishes at each meal, because the 7th day.
Okay.
Right? And it doesn't be a whole lot. But I'm not comfortable with like no, it's special. Kasha varnish is my favorite.
What's that?
It's buckwheat groats and bow tie pasta with onion gravy.
Okay.
It's delicious.
Walk me through that one more time.
Buckwheat groats.
What's a groat?
Like buckwheat cooked as a cooked grain.
Okay.
With bow tie pasta.
Okay.
And onion gravy. Yes.
Like a brown gravy?
Yes.
Okay.
It can be like a clearish one, or it can be like a heavy dark brown gravy.
Me a picture next time
yes. Oh my God, that is one of my favorite Jewish soul foods.
Okay.
But at the same point in time, like taking jollof rice and taking like blanched collard green leaves, and then cooking that in a light broth with tomatoes, homemade tomato, like homegrown tomatoes, baby.
Okay.
It's good. I mean, I'll say this. People have asked me, what is Koshersoul? And I said, look, It's whatever the people who I find myself in communion and community with want it to be. I didn't want to write a fake book. Mm-hmm. Well, Koshersoul is this because I said so. No.
Right.
No, we ain't Preppy Handbook in this one.
Right.
We ain't Grunge Dictionary in this one. I said to myself, why did y'all need a Grunge Dictionary? I said, I remember Kurt Cobain. He said he didn't say more than 5 to 10 words at a time,
right.
and I could understand every last one of them.
Right.
So therefore, I didn't want to write a fake book.
Right.
I wanted people's kosher soul to speak for them. Mm-hmm. But what I found out was I was one of the few, the proud, who thought that as a culinarian, as a culinary historian, it was my privilege to create fusion. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And so therefore, I have a good time saying, let's take that chicken soup and make it Senegalese.
Right.
Let's take this,
right.
the Lithuanian rice kugel, and make it Southern.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take that jollof rice and make stuffed cabbage and stuffed collards with it. Let's have some fun. If living is about one more day,
right,
and one more day to have fun and celebrate and have simcha, and the best words I can teach you today are chidor mitzvah, which means to beautify the commandments. Mm. To use, so I do here chidor mitzvah not just with the food, with the kippah that has Zora Neale Hurston, Audre Lorde, and James Baldwin on it. It's the Shabbat cover from Ghana. It's the Talit from Ethiopia. It's the African American Seder plate, the complete way I express my absolute endearing love for being a Jew, and absolute loving pride in being a black man.
Ugh, that's a perfect place to end.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael.
It's an
Twitty.
honor.
It is a true pleasure to always talk to you. Thank you for being a friend of the Tenement Museum.
Absolutely.
Thank you for writing Koshersoul. Thank you all for tuning in this evening to hear me in conversation with Michael Twitty. So if you haven't gotten it, you can get Koshersoul, the faith and food journey.
Hanukkah is coming.
African-American Jew.
Stock up. Kwanzaa is coming. Stock up.
That's right. And you can order it from the Tenement Museum bookshop.
Yay.
So support your local bookseller.
There you go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's good. It's really great. That flowed.